So there's little that I can be absolutely sure of as a pastor when I preach here each week, but there is one thing I can be sure of. And that one thing is that every person in this group today is going to pass from this world. That I can be sure of. And so it's something that we should all think about. It really doesn't matter what you believe or how much money you have or how healthy you feel. It's one appointment that none of us will miss. And it has raised the oldest question that every civilization has wrestled with is, so what happens when we die? Even in our increasingly secular society, I was really surprised that 70% of Americans believe in life after death, but only a third have a vision of what happens. So today I want to walk through different traditions that have answered that question with a focus on the unique insights of the Swedenborgian faith. Let's start with the Old Testament. So the ancient Hebrews spoke of Sheol. It was a shadowy underworld where the dead existed in a kind of dim life. It was not a punishment. It was simply where you went. Over time, Judaism evolved into a strong belief in resurrection. So it changed from that early belief, and they had a belief in resurrection, judgment, and paradise. And that's why by the time of Jesus, people really, the Jewish people already understood that way of looking at heaven. So the New Testament, when we have Jesus, he talks about the afterlife frequently. You'll remember he speaks about sheep and goats and wheat and chaff, and he tells this incredible parable about this rich young man suffering in hell, basically, with Lazarus, a beggar on earth, who's with Abraham. And then another notable moment is when he's on the cross. He turns to the thief beside him and says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." So he didn't say not someday or on a final judgment day. He said today. So it's interesting. Jesus taught one thing about what happens next, and Paul in his letters talked about something else. Paul believed that Jesus was going to rise in his lifetime, and he described a time when the dead would be lifted out of the ground and there'd be a final judgment, and that people would be in a sleep until that time. In fact, I remember my German grandmother, who was raised Catholic, saying to me, the one thing that she really didn't like about growing up in the Catholic Church for her was the idea that everybody was just sleeping in the ground until Judgment Day. So that is, I think, less prominent today, but throughout Christianity, the idea that there's a final Judgment Day and that everybody waits for that day eventually got cemented into the Apostles' Creed, and many churches recite that every Sunday. And it says that essentially that Jesus ascended into heaven, he's seated at the right hand of God, the Father Almighty, and then he will come to judge the living and the dead. So there will be like a judgment day. So that view has, for many Christians, that's how they would look at it. But that is a little different than what Jesus was saying, which is to the thief on the cross next to him, "I'll be with you today in paradise." Or to the rich man in Hades, or many other times. He's not talking about a death that's in the future, waiting for a final trumpet. It happens right away. So that's a little different viewpoint even within Christianity itself. But Christianity is not the only faith that's mapped out a territory beyond death. Every religion has wrestled with it. Judaism, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, indigenous traditions. They all ask the same question. They have different details of how they describe what happens. But what they agree on is that death is not the end. They all teach that in some way your life here impacts what happens next, and that your inner life is very important. When Dr. Raymond Moody published his groundbreaking book, Life After Life, and on the topic of near-death experiences in 1975, so it was a kind of a cutting-edge breaking story that people were starting to have near-death experiences. He said that based on his experiences, there was two religions that most matched what he was experiencing in his scientific study: Tibetan Buddhism and Swedenborg. So I want to just mention about Tibetan Buddhism briefly, because I think it's interesting that those are the two that seem to resonate most with people who have studied near-death experience. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is a guidebook for the dying, and it's meant to be read aloud to someone as they're passing. So you would actually read this to someone who was dying or dead, and it teaches you to go through 3 stages. First, you encounter pure light, then you have visions that are projections of your own mind, and finally you're pulled toward rebirth, and that is driven by your habitual patterns. So there's no external judge. You're meeting yourself in Tibetan Book of the Dead. So what surprised me about that was it closely mirrors Swedenborg, where we encounter the full truth of who we are when we die. And our destination is not shaped by a judge, but by the love that we've cultivated in our lives. So those are 2 different traditions, centuries apart, very similar message. One big difference is that in Tibetan Buddhism, you would be reincarnated. And Swedenborg, it's not completely clear, but for the most part, doesn't talk about reincarnation or we are reincarnated. And that might be an interesting topic for another sermon. And then today, over that time, even since Moody's book in 1975, we've had now thousands of people with near-death experiences. And they all seem to report a very similar experiences, which are you get a sense of leaving your body, a presence of a light, being met by loved ones, and feeling overwhelming love. And all of them pretty much have a reluctance to return to this sphere. So it's invariably a fairly positive experience for most of those stories. Okay, so now let's go to Swedenborg, and I'm going to talk about the world of spirits, heaven, and hell. And I'm not going to keep you hours and hours, so I'll be as concise as I can. But let's start with the world of spirits, because that's a unique phrase you may not be familiar with. Swedenborg says that when you first die, you don't go directly to heaven or hell. You go to this place called the world of spirits. And there you angels are with you through the death experience. So they are guiding you the whole time, sitting with you, speaking through their faces, evidently, just reassuring you that you're safe, you're at peace, that you're loved. So it's a very positive experience, though obviously the physical death could have been scary. People are immediately taken care of. In this world of spirits, which I often refer to as like, the best image I have in my mind is like an Ellis Island, where you get you're kind of figuring things out. It looks and feels much like this sphere. So I thought one of the most interesting stories that I heard about the world of spirits was that after 3 days, people end up there and open their eyes to this new world, and they go through a review process, and you feel every feeling that you created on this sphere from every person that you impacted, for better, for worse. And there's no shame, but it's an opportunity to experience your life through the impact of how you made people feel. I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think the story that surprised me the most was that there are people who don't realize they died. The transition is so smooth that they actually don't believe they died, and they actually witness their own funeral, and only then do they come to the realization that they've passed. So I think that's a very interesting image. So what happens in this world of spirits is that gradually your outer self falls away. All of us here on this sphere wear masks. We say things that we don't necessarily mean. We're polite sometimes when we feel maybe contempt. We're generous sometimes when we want to take credit. Well, in the world of spirits, all pretenses dissolve, and who we truly are at our deepest essence comes through. And the process is gentle, and for those whose deepest love was genuine, even if it was buried under mistakes or pretense, that unveiling is described as a relief. So while many religions see the afterlife as a chance for a vengeful God to give out punishment, Swedenborg describes just the opposite, that it's incredible love. No one is judged on their appearances. No one's condemned by their ignorance. Everybody gets a chance to be fully seen for who they really are, and then they can gravitate toward where they want to be. One thought I always had about it, well, could people in that level, could they be changed? And sadly, it doesn't seem like people do change too much here. You can gain knowledge, but you sort of are who you created yourself to be on earth, what you love the most. So let's now move from the world of spirit. So then gradually you kind of gravitate to the community that is most like you, that shares your love. And let's see what happens in heaven next. And in heaven, this idea of clouds and harps, not so much. And what Swedenborg describes is a lot more interesting. And he says that angels, as they move into heaven, are surprised again because it's so familiar. They have homes, conversations, friendships, and meaningful life. In some ways, you could say that heaven is a more accurate reality of things, and this is a dim reflection on this sphere. So it seems feelings, love, emotions are much more intense. He saw angels walking, talking, and greeting each other in homes and gardens, communities organized around their shared love. People looked human, not like beams of light, but they were people. And one fun story is a lot of people gravitate to the age that they feel most comfortable at from this life. Everyone in heaven has a function, so we don't stop working and have eternal rest like we often say. You're useful, and your usefulness is your joy. And then the communities you gather with are the ones that share your love. So for people who love teaching, maybe Katie and others, they're with other teachers, people who love caring for children or with helping with children. So it's extraordinarily diverse. It's not static. And we keep growing in wisdom on the other side. The biggest difference that I could see is that on this sphere, we're constantly being tempted, good and evil, a lot of pressure. That is removed. We just grow in wisdom in heaven. It's not the same tension, which is kind of a relief. So the question for a congregation that has a lot of pets, you've always asked me what happens to pets, so I've researched that. And heaven's full of animals. And when I looked up Swedenborg and pets, he didn't really have that much to say about it because pets as a concept is actually a relatively new idea. It was not that common for everybody to have pets. But living in Washington, D.C., everybody has pets, and so does our congregation. We may be small in numbers, but we are large in petdom. We have a lot of pets, and we will do that blessing when the weather gets better. So the best way to think about a pet in this would be that if it's an extension of your love, and for a lot of people, pets teach them about love, it would of course be with you in heaven because it's connected to you. And that also, while Swedenborg doesn't talk that much, I looked up near-death experiences. There are a lot of people who were greeted by animals they done in this life, and it was very joyful. So, yay for all the pet people. Again, interesting story. I could talk about it forever. This whole book's on it. But one story that really jumped out at me was a group of what he calls Tartars, a Central Asian people that Swedenborg meets on the other side. When they learned that he was a Christian, they made this observation. They said, many Christians know the teachings of Jesus, but they don't live by them. These people who had never read the Bible on earth, they understood something about heaven that churchgoers miss. Heaven is not about knowing the right words, it's about living the right loves. I thought that was really interesting. For me personally, I've always felt connected to the other side. I know other people in the call and in the room have that ability, some a lot more than me. I know that when my mom passed, I had a dream where she said she was happier than she could ever describe. The joy was beyond words, she said. And that would really echo what we're reading from Swedenborg, that you're coming home. And it's really a joyful, happy experience in a way beyond what we can really comprehend at our deepest sense of joy here. Okay, it wouldn't be a good sermon about heaven and hell if I didn't talk about hell, right? So I would say the biggest difference between traditional Christianity and Swedenborgian Christianity is the teaching about hell. We believe that God sends no one to hell. This is not a place of divine punishment. God is love, so that doesn't change. But hell does exist. That disappoints some people. And it exists because freedom exists. So people in this sphere are people who lived on earth and they chose to love only themselves. All they did was pursue power, control, domination. And that was the love that became the organizing center of their entire being. Swedenborg calls it a ruling love. So after death, when those faces and the masks fall apart and fall off of you in the world of spirits, those people would be drawn to communities that share the same desire. And that is hell. It's a destination chosen from within. And I would say what surprised me most about hell and all the stories that I read was that, and there's some really interesting stories like emperors who are living with other emperors or thieves living with other thieves. One guy is endlessly counting money, but there's no money there. You can just imagine. So engaging in their deepest delight. But I think the thing that surprised me the most was that the people were not necessarily unhappy because they were with their greatest love. They'd actually be unhappy if they couldn't be engaging in what they love the most. When we read about fire in hell, it's described here as the burning rage and the craving at the lowest levels. And hell is kept in order by angels because the angels, the beings who are living in hell would be were horrible to each other. So, okay, we did it. We covered heaven, hell, world of spirits, Tibetan Book of the Dead. So why would we even want to study this? Well, one, it's a question we're all going to have to answer. I believe it gives us comfort. First, many of us have lost people who have passed to the other side. I think it's lovely to know that they woke up attended by angels and they found their way home. I think that's beautiful and very comforting. And I think it's comforting for us too, because death is not something to fear. Speaking for myself, I fear the process of dying. I always say in my sermons, I'm a control freak. So the whole idea of like when your body is gone and you're depending on other people and all that, that's a little scary and humbling and probably part of the process. But death itself doesn't scare me. We wake up to ourselves as whole and intact, and we feel like who we really are. So it's not that we become something new in that sense. And it doesn't matter so much what we believed, but it does matter what we loved. And that's important to remember. Heaven is not a reward for correct theology. Hell is not a punishment for the wrong answers. Just before the service, I was looking at some songs to play, and most of the Christian songs were like, yes, someday God, everybody will bow before you and everybody will be punished. And I was like, no. That's not what we're looking for. But the biggest takeaway, I think, is that this life, our life, we only get one shot at it in our tradition, and it matters enormously. Every choice we make is shaping our eternal character, and we become the acclamation of our choices. So the time to cultivate love is now. And the good news is that we can work on that now before our death. The spiritual world is actually already here. Heaven and hell are already in our lives, and it's the choices that we make. And it's a sphere we can't see with our senses, but we're in communities of heaven and hell now. Every act of compassion, every moment of genuine connection, every choice to serve, rather than to dominate, is heaven breaking into your daily life. So let us develop our daily practices of choosing love over selfishness, truth over deception, service over domination, and compassion over contempt. If this is true, then I I wonder what we have to worry about when it comes to death, because heaven begins now, and it begins with the next choice that you make and who you want to become. Amen. Now we will open it up to questions.
Yeah, so I'm just curious if you gravitate towards the communities that share the same love. What about like, family? Like, are you still with like family, even though you might have like different loves? So one is a teacher, one is a firefighter. Like, do you meet together at some point, or are you living in independent communities?
It seems to me like my best sense of it is that you get to, if you, let's say you want to be with a family member. Let's say you're in a community that has a certain love, and they and this is something we discussed in the quantum physics discussion. You're immediately there with somebody, so there's no time and space. So if you say you want to be with your mom, you would just be with your mom instantly, and as you think about it. So it's not like you're locked into communities and you can't move in and out of them, but it would be, yeah. So I think you could certainly do it. The trickier question, I thought the question you were going to ask was even trickier, is, so what if it's a close person and they're in a hellish sphere? Those spheres seem like you cannot get in and out of. In fact, there's a description of people who were in a hellish state and tried to move into a heavenly state, and they said it couldn't breathe. They repulsed them. So I think those spheres are pretty divided. But I think in the heavenly sphere, you could be with anybody at any time and ask any question and meet with, so that's a good question. That would be my guess from what I've read.
Dwelling on the line you gave of, Christ being, in paradise with the thief next to him, what are your wisdoms and Swedenborg's wisdoms on how our sort of works and our merits in life map onto that beyond, right? Because presumably if sort of more hellish living destines you for sort of these sort of layered spheres on the hellish side, presumably there's that tiering would progress also into the positive lens, but there's a nuance there, a caveat, given that sort of the thief is destined for paradise, that I was hoping you might comment on.
Yeah, so it's a good question. Why, if the thief was a thief, then why will I see him in paradise? Won't he be punished? And my guess. So one thing is we have. I think it's a warning for us never to judge another person, because we have no idea their trajectory, and we have no idea what our trajectory. We're doing the best we can to figure out our own trajectory, and to try to be honest with ourselves. That person's on a different trajectory. We don't really know. If a child, let's say a child was abused or lived in poverty, or you travel all over the world, so we can't judge what the choices are, what their choices are, by our choices necessarily. So I don't know. I mean, I could make something up about the thief, but clearly the thief had a deep, compassionate thing and said, stop insulting this guy. He is the Messiah. So he's tapping in at some level. Now, was he a thief? Who knows? Because Jesus was being executed on a lie. A lot of people are being executed all over the world all the time for a lie by governments. So I don't know if he was a thief, and I don't know, I don't know anything more about him. But it is always, that question does come up, like, of all people, why did he get in? But it's not so. It really isn't so much it's not just like merit, like you live by the rules and all that. It's more of an accumulation of really what you loved. And if this guy on the cross, whatever his life was like, he had something open that he could see that nobody else could that day. And so that's, I think, what Jesus is saying. You're seeing something in my darkest moment, and you're supporting me. So that would be my take. Does that make sense? Or is that helpful? Someone told me that saying, does that make sense, is not the best thing to say. I don't know. I don't know. Is that okay? Okay. Next, I see Joy's hand up.
I appreciated it, Rich, because I have found myself reflecting on something I may have shared here before, which came out very surprisingly in response to a patient's question about sort of his destiny and being judged. And what emerged without my really thinking about it was God doesn't keep a ledger on us to judge us. I think God is very interested in the ledger we keep on ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that what I like about that, it does point to like we are on our own trajectories, and we are on our own complexity. And another surprising story that I read repeatedly was people who were perceived as pillars of the community on this sphere, but they did everything for the wrong reasons. Like they did it for acclaim, he said, and for credit. Again, we might think, oh, that was just the best person, and another person was a thief. Who knows? So yeah, it's there. I think it is really, that's a good point, Joe. I think it's very individual, and yeah, it causes us not to judge others. Malcolm?
I always remembered what one of your predecessors said about the movie Ghost, Dick Baxter. And he said it was the perfect Swedenborgian movie. And if one remembers the scene where the main character dies, unaware that he indeed has died and is still trying to communicate with those around him, it really does present a nice kind of movie version of Swedenborg's idea.
Yeah, that is a fun movie on a lot of levels. It's a fun movie. It also has nice visuals for the dark forces in that movie. That's what I remember too. Another good movie is What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams, and evidently that was they claim some connection with a reading of Swedenborg, the directors of that. Katerina?
I have a question about redemption. Is there in Swedenborgian writings the idea that you can be redeemed after you pass away and transition from one place to the next?
Do you mean like could you move from hell to heaven?
Correct.
That is surprisingly sad. He says there's a great possibility of it, but it doesn't really happen. In other words, you kind of are this earth. That it points to the importance of this life. You are kind of what you are. I think the phrase is the tree lays where it falls. In other words, there's every opportunity for that, but it's not really taken. That we kind of are the amalgams of our love when we pass. So you could definitely be educated and learn different religious things, and I'm sure that my theology and all that, is, I'm sure that is half of it's wrong, or I'm sure that I could have scholars teaching me, no, you got that wrong, you got that wrong. But that would be my understanding, but my will at that point is pretty set. So it's not a really. It says this life is really important for making your decisions, and that we kind of are pretty locked in for who we really are.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich.
Sure. And I know there's a question in the chat, and then I see Craig's hand up. Let me read the question in the chat. I wonder if Swedenborg's description of how much people can change would differ if written in a later era we have more knowledge of psychology from a healing, change-making perspective. and that because we have more knowledge of what gets in our way, we might be better able to use our will to enact that. Yeah, well, and there was that's a good point, Ellie. And there's one of my old Swedenborgian teachers from years ago. His name was George Dole. His quote was, someone said, "Is anybody ever gone from hell, like choosing hell, and then they evolved into heaven?" And his answer was, "Not yet." So it's like, from his understanding. So in other words, who knows? And who knows how the world the world evolves? And yeah, there could be different understandings. To your point, that supposedly, if Swedenborg is accurate, we've been evolving spiritually in this world. And if that's true, hopefully there's deeper spiritual insights and growth. So, and then let me go to Craig.
Hey, Rich. Thank you for the message this afternoon. I really appreciate it. When talking about how we can progress in the next life, the sense that I've gotten from what I've been taught and what I've read of Swedenborg has been really focused on this idea that when we move to the next realm, the spiritual, the sort of mask of the physical and our ability to kind of pretend to be one thing while truly having our heart set on something else, is kind of evaporates, is taken away. So it ends up being not so much like, that you're having to continue to choose something different, but that your real self, your true feelings, your true desires are revealed in such a more direct and meaningful way. And so there isn't kind of this even desire for trying to move closer towards God if your desire isn't already there, because whatever desire has been defined in this world is sort of just revealed in and is more transparent. So that's, I think, where that sense of what you were said about how important this life is kind of was driven home by Swedenborg with this idea that, pick what you have the opportunity here to choose one or the other, and whether you choose the light or the dark. And, if you choose the light in every moment and that becomes what you truly love, that progresses into the next life, or the opposite. And then once that's there, it just becomes revealed and exposed.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight, and one theme that seems really important in this is your intentions, and it's a practice that we could develop here now. Is ask, why am I doing this? Like, why? At the deepest, honest level, why am I doing it? Is it for attention? Is it for my ego? Is it because it pays the bills? Like, what am I doing, and why am I doing it? What's the true motivation that I never tell anybody? I tell a story about myself publicly, but truly getting clear on our motivation. If we can do that on this sphere, we can get rid of it. We can reduce the masks. I don't know. We can get rid of them and be more prepared. So I think that's a good point. I think Ellie may have had a follow-up. Swedenborg didn't seem to emphasize or have a ton of experience in the healing domain, which I think is relevant. Yeah, I think he was more of a science observer of the human body. So maybe that's a weak spot on his part. So that's a good point. Betty, I see your hand up, but you're on mute. You're on mute, so you'd have to get off of mute.
We're asking you to unmute. Click
Yeah,
above.
she's working on it.
Yeah.
Anybody else with a question in the meantime? Aiden, did that make sense what I said today? Does that make sense? Yeah? Okay. He knows, I'll tell you. He knows. Okay, Betty, you're off mute.
Okay. I've been doing a lot of research lately for different reasons, and I found something with Swedenborg, and he said ultimately, because I spent a lot of time with his writings, and he said ultimately that it's your intention in every case that really is what matters. If you do something bad and you really did not intend to do that, what's going to be looked at is what the intention was.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so I think looking at our intentions and our motivations, someone who intended to do good but made mistakes along the way, which we all do, but someone who looks really good in the public life and is doing good, but their intention is really for fame or money or status or credit or whatever. Yeah, so I think that's just a really important thing in our tradition is it's your intentions. What are your intentions? And I think that's something we can all examine, because I would say that I'll just use me as an example. I don't do anything from purely good. If I had to put a percentage on it, I think about it all the time, and so there's always mixed intentions in what we do. And I do meet people whose intentions I can see are much purer, like they're closer to 90 to 100%. So moving that needle in our own lives for our intentions and looking at them and saying, I'd really love to live my life where my intentions are purely good. But when you meet somebody like that, you get that vibe right away that they're just operating from pure intentions and without falsity.
Mm.
Well, I do hope that in this discussion, I hope this sermon does give people a sense of peace, both in our own lives and for the people we love who have passed or are in that state. I can say from a pastoral perspective, I've helped a lot of people as a pastor, right, when they're making the transition. And having this as a teaching has been incredibly helpful. And I could do a whole sermon of just story after story after story of people when hearing this beautiful positive story compared to what they're afraid of, which is going to hell because they didn't know if they believed the right thing or they made mistakes So this is it's very, very practical spirituality, practical mysticism. It's very practical. And I appreciate the chance to share it with you today and discuss it with you and keep those requests. This was a requested topic. And if you have requests, I will keep doing them.